What's going on, guys? This is Kaisho. Welcome back. So we are back with another video. So in this video, we're going to cover top 5 sided cards to play in March 2025 OCG format. So we are at the twilight or the tail end of our January Alliance Insight 2025 metagame before we venture towards the new upcoming ban list of April format and the new product of Deckbuild Justice Hunters. But on the flip side, on the contrary, it is still very important to know how to calibrate our side deck and to play the efficient cards in answering the best decks available because we are going to close out the March with Battle Nexus tournaments and also the upcoming YOT Hong Kong. So we're still going to have a plethora of big events and potentially the tail end big events of your locals or casuals in your area. No? So without further ado, let's start. So moving on first with Mulcharmy Purulia. So this card was relegated towards the side deck of many people because a lot of players are opting to prioritize Poalos over Purulia on the main deck due to how the Malice can be a very threatening combo deck against the metagame and also the popularity of Orcus and other stuff like Christian, no? I think it makes sense to play Poalos over Purulia. But all in all, I think Purulia is still a very relevant side deck option right now and it gives you so many draws on this metagame. And moving on towards the strengths of Purulia, so it is your Ryzil antidote. You get so much value from Purulia against Ryzil. I mean, most of their cards are special summon from hand and also against the other control and much more mid-range type of deck like Dragon Maid, for example, no, and Voices Voice and other stuff. You get also so much value against those decks using Purulia. And all in all, it is decent against most rogue decks in the format and we could see a huge variance of control decks that are running around in the format. Like we have seen on the Battle Nexus, the top tricks have topped the tournament, and other rogue decks are also gaining some traction on the bigger regions in Japan, South Korea, and China. And also aids your draw power or complements other draw power cards. When you pair this off with other draw power like Maxino, you get so much hand size advantage using Purulia and it gives you a very good chance of drawing into your proper and adequate hand traps or cards that may break the board of your opponent when going second. So towards the meta decks that can be tackled with Purulia would be none other than Ryzil. It is the most obvious choice that you are going to punish using the Purulia because the Ryzil are just inherently going to summon from their hand and inevitably they are going to normal summon their sword. No? So I think you get so much draw power against Ryzil. And moving on next, towards our top 4, we do have Droll and Lockbird. So, once again, Droll has been seeing resurgence on most people's side deck and sometimes even main deck, no? If they still have the space to play Droll. But I think Droll and Lockbird is one of the most impactful, if not the most impactful, hand trap that you could play in order to stop the best decks available. And moving on, so Droll and Lockbird stops the combo decks from getting out of control. I mean, it just stops opponents from adding cards from their deck, and most of the combo decks does that mechanic, and Droll and Lockbird is here to stop them. And also a very strong card to checkmate opponent's aggro. So when your opponent is very aggressive and they tend to special summon a lot and gain card advantages from their deck towards their hand, no, they could be stopped using Droll and Lockbird and limit their aggression. And also rogue decks aren't safe either. Decks like Voices Voice, for example, and stuff like Salaman Great, and a lot of uh, rogue and casual decks are going to suffer very bad with Droll and Lockbird, especially the variants of Blue Eyes, for example, Blue Eyes Buster Blader, and stuff like Branded No. And there's a bunch of decks that could be rattled with Droll and Lockbird. And if you play your hand cards effectively and use Droll as the main source of your hand trap, I think you could stop them in their place. And moving on towards the decks that can be tackled with Droll, it would be none other than Ryzil, of course. Ryzil has Ascension, Tachyon, Bonfire, and Small World, so they are safe with Droll. Most often than not, they would play amidst Droll, and they're going to get punished with one of their search cards. And also, another deck that is seeing so much traction recently, especially in Japan and South Korea, would be none other than Sky Striker, one of the most favorite decks of many people in Asia. and it is seeing revival on the tier D status of most tier lists, especially on provincial tier lists on Japan. And I do think that Sky Striker is a valid and legitimate deck right now, especially on the hands of a very skilled pilot. They can confidently play Sky Striker on the top level because of their mastery on the deck and how they shape the hand trap lineup and board breaker lineup of the Sky Striker main deck. And moving on, towards the top 3 on our list would be Lightning Storm. I think Lightning Storm is one of the most general sideboard cards that you could play in order to stop the top 5 best decks. We do have Blue Eyes Primite, Regenesis, and things like Ryzil, no? And of course, the Orcus and Malice. All of them does have some sort of back row interruption. And more importantly, on game 2 to 3, where opponents are siding Solemn Strike, Solemn Judgment, and stuff like the barrier, no, and other interrupting trap cards like Imperm. So Lightning Storm could handle all of those problems all at once. And moving on next, we do have the strengths of Lightning Storm. It is a card that demolishes the search of stun and control decks. So the most uh, rising deck in across Asia would be none other than Regenesis, and Regenesis tends to rely on their back row set with Solemns and Floodgates like Skill Drain. There can be only one, and Summon Limit. Those are really punishing when they go first and set up their board with their high attack monsters paired with some negate or 2 and interruptions from the Regenesis monsters. They're going to be in a very commanding position to control the match. So you need Lightning Storm in order to annihilate those back row setup and potentially their monsters as well, no? But all in all, I think Lightning Storm is a very versatile and dexterous card to play in this metagame, and also very flexible against the metagame. I think you could hurt Blue Eyes Primite and Ryzil, for example, their field, of course, and their back row with their talents and rather trust targets, and also their floodgate of anti-surfragance and judgment could be a thing as well. And stuff like Orcus, no, they have their Babel and your Crescendo. So you are going to hurt a lot of meta decks out there. More importantly, it is your holy grail against most sideboards. It is a good card on your side deck that could check a lot of decks, control, mid-range, combo, all of them will be having some sort of back row interruptions. So you're going to trade for card advantages using Lightning Storm quite splendidly. And moving on towards the decks that can be tackled with Lightning Storm would be the control decks. No, Regenesis, a really popular deck, quite simplistic, very linear, not so many complex plays, no. So a lot of people are allured with the appeal of a very simple and effective deck like Regenesis, and Runic, of course, still valid, still relevant on this metagame. Tends to play with Dominus cards right now with Impulse, Purge, and almost all of their macro setup are still present on their side deck and sometimes main deck. And also Labyrinth, still a decent deck. Control, of course, relying on high impact trap cards like the Ruma Cannon, Dogmatica Punishment, and Ice Dragon Prison. More importantly, their floodgate of stuff like Rivalry goes in and Skill Drain a couple of times on their main deck. Moving on towards the second on our list would be Solemn Judgment. I think this is the most efficient card to play, especially on a deck that is not going to play through the anti-self fragrance restrictions or stuff like Dimensional Barrier that could hurt your own Exceed monster when you're playing Ryzil or other synchro decks like Blue Eyes, no? So you have Solemn Judgment as your pseudo Omni Negate on your board. You get to answer almost everything on the game, and also it is a spell speed 4. It is a counter trap, so not many people does have a response on Judgment. So moving on towards the strengths of Judgment, it is terrific against Regenesis and Tenpai Dragon. So if you are not really knowledgeable on your environment, better expect that Regenesis and Tenpai Dragon would come up because those are two of the most represented decks right now recently, and Tenpai Dragon is probably the most represented deck across Southeast Asia. Of course, in the Philippines, Tenpai Dragon is a well-known deck. A lot of people pilots the Tenpai Dragon, and they are not giving up on Tenpai Dragon. They innovate the Tenpai Dragon with more hand traps, more engines, and more board breakers. So Judgment could save a lot of your board and pose against the Tenpai Dragon. And of course, Regency is relying on their Nadir Servant to break boards, Lightning Storm, Regeki, for example, no, and sometimes evenly matched. Judgment could also protect you from those blowout cards and also allows you to dictate the tempo going first. So when you set Judgment on your already established board with your 1, 2, 3 interruptions, I think you are going to have a very safe, and it will inevitably make your mind at peace when you have Judgment on your back row. You are safe from stuff like Forbidden Droplet, Bard that they don't have trap on their hand, no, and stuff like Lightning Storm, Evenly Match, and Regeki sometimes, no. So you have a very good protection on Solemn Judgment, and also a very generic yet great going first card on the format, as we have number of various staples being played. So yeah, we do have a lot of things now going on. We do have Dark Cooler No More sometimes, Ultimate Slayer, Gordon Schneider, and other stuff like Regeki are even played, and Lightning Storm as well, Heavy Storm, Duster, all of those back row and mass removals are really present. And also, it can stop your opponents from their normal summons as well. So it is very generic, yet very great, very efficient on the side deck. Moving on towards the decks that can be tackled with Judgment would be Regenesis, namely their Lightning Storm on the main deck, and those Nadirs, those pot cards can also be a target for Judgment, no? So there's a lot of things for Genesis that are going to be crippled with Judgment, and of course Tanpai Dragon, they would rely on Lightning Storm and other blowout cards on their main deck aside from their hand traps. So we are going to stop them from annihilating your board, and Sky Striker, another deck that relies on spell counters and spell cards, and also their removals are also present with their Widow Anchor and Afterburners on the main deck. All of those toolbox type of cards for Sky Striker are very much playable and searchable using their Engage and Sky Striker cards. Moving on next, towards the top one on our list would be still none other than Artifact Lancea. I mean, it speaks volume on how the metagame have shaped. Recently, we do have seen the success of Cryzil, but the most threatening part is Malice because not many hand traps can deal with Malice. Imperm Veiler would be subpar on certain situations against Malice, and not many cards interact well with Malice, like Ghost Ogre, for example, no? And stuff like the Ghost Mourner and Mulit Shield. So we have Lancea to answer their banishing potential and limiting them towards restricting their plays without their banishing mechanics. And moving on, towards the Lancea, your savior against Malice. I mean, this is arguably the best card against Malice, and very quick as well. It could be played in a quick manner because it is a quick play. It has quick effect, and you should not rely on stuff like floodgates and stuff like Case Hunter, no, to answer your Malice problem, because Artifact Lancea are just so much better against those cards, and also a phenomenal card going against some of the top decks. We do have Orcus that is going to rely on banishing effects as well, and Christian. And on the latter part, we do have Runic and other banishing decks as well. So they could get all hurt with Artifact Lancea, and can be nifty on various situations. You're going to play around certain interactions using Lancea where you prevent your opponent from banishing cards on your disposal and on their disposal as well. So it could be really clutch on some situations. And moving on towards the decks that can be tackled with Lancea would be Christian. Surprisingly, Christian does suffer a lot with Lancea, and most often than not, they would end on a premature board if you're going to hit them with Lancea. And of course, Mali is arguably the second or first best deck, depending on the preference of your of the player. So arguably, this is a top two contender deck and a very successful as well on that manner. It has won various tournaments, Battle Nexus tournament, YOT, or rather 3-on-3 tournament, and the recent City Duel Indonesia tournaments and China mainland tournaments. No, very successful deck on Asia, all over, and Orcus as well. Really budget friendly deck. You could probably buy the deck on at least 1.5 pesos, no. And I think Orcus is one of the go-to decks of most budget players across Southeast Asia. So we are going to see a lot of Orcus potentially on your upcoming big events. like Battle Nexus. So yeah, that sums up our top 5 side deck cards to play in March 2025 OCG format. So if you found this video informative and helpful, please consider subscribing. It definitely motivates me a lot to keep providing this content for you guys. So once again, thank you for watching. See you on the next one. Peace.